Okay, so here's a case study on a note that I recently closed out that was in Dayton, Ohio. Oops. So this was a contract for deed with an unpaid balance just over 30,000. Borrower was 7 months behind. They had had a pretty spotty pay history. Had made four regular payments in the last 12 months, and then right before that 12-month period, they had made one big payment of like $2,000. So the kind of borrower that never really stayed on track. The BPO value was 55,000, so there was a lot of equity in this. That was one of the things I liked about the deal. And it was a pretty nice house, some good pride of ownership. You can see they had some landscaping and other things going on. One thing to point out was that this contract for deed was originated more than 5 years from when I bought it. And in Ohio, when you have a contract for deed that's over 5 years old, you actually would have to go through the full foreclosure process instead of doing a forfeiture, which means that if you have to take the house back, it's a more expensive process, can take more time than it would be if you were just doing a forfeiture. Not a showstopper, just something to be aware of when you're doing your ROI calculations. So one of the things that's always good, especially doing a case study when you're closing, is look at what were your estimates and projections up front, and how did that compare to what actually happened. So the purchase price was about exactly 50% of unpaid balance. Bought this in the end of June 2018. And at the time, I looked at a couple different scenarios. And one was if I ended up making an agreement with the borrower to get them back on track and do a loan mod, and then sell the reperforming CFD at 80% of unpaid balance, which is what I was using at the time. I actually use numbers that are a little smaller than that now. So that would be a 37% ROI overall and about 18% to the JV partner. With rounding, it's a little bit different. If I did have to go through the foreclosure process, it'd be about a 39% ROI or 19% to the JV partner. And I thought there was a decent chance to get this reperforming because there had been some payments in the last 12 months, but thought it was maybe like a 50-50 toss-up which way this one was going to go. So after I bought it, first thing we had to do was get the loan transferred, um, and then use Polaris. Oh, all right. I don't know why that thing built out of order. But got the loan transfer completed about 6 weeks afterwards, which is kind of typical. Often takes 1 or 2 months for the loan transfer. I think a lot of new loan buyers don't realize how long that process can take up front till you can actually get going. And once I got that boarded, I used a company called Polaris Counselors for the borrower outreach. They're able to contact the borrower, work something out, see what was going on. And we got a forbearance agreement with a trial payment plan in place at the end of August, which is actually pretty fast overall, considering I closed on the loan at the end of June. So the borrower agreed to make a one-time payment of $2,000 and then make the next 6 payments on time. And then if the borrower completed that, I agreed to modify the loan. And what I did in this case is agree to take any remaining arrearages after that trial payment plan, so any remaining back interest, delinquent taxes, other charges, move those to the back of the loan, and then just extend the term out to keep the payment the same. So the borrower did follow through on that agreement. So there had been one normal payment that came in August, and then they made that $2,000 good faith down payment at the beginning of October. And when I do these deals, I always want to have some kind of good faith down payment. The $2,000 down payment is actually quite a bit higher than what I normally get. Usually it's more along the lines of $500 to $1,000 overall. So that was really nice. And then the borrower actually ended up making payments on time over the next year. So they made the good faith down payment, they made the 6 trial payments, and then we modified the loan in May of 2019. And then they continued to make payments after that, and then actually sold the loan just in August of 2019. So what were the total returns overall? So when I calculate the cost basis, what I'm showing here is the cost basis that's in QuickBooks. So not to dive too deep into accounting, but I bought the note for $15,360. But then as the borrower made payments, the portion of the payment that gets credited to principal actually comes off the note basis within QuickBooks. So when I'm calculating the profit on the sale, my cost basis of the note had come down to $12,653. And then I had holding costs or expenses of 3,496. So my accounting cost basis was 16,149. In a little bit, I'll talk about what the actual cost basis was. Sold this for 19,695. So I sold this for less than the 80% of UPB that I was projecting. But there was a $3,500 profit on the sale, and then which is accounting for the interest portion of the payment, or sorry, the principal portion of the payments. And then there was an additional 3,900 in interest received. So we had a total profit coming in of just about $7,500. And so the total spent was 18,856. So if you look at what we actually spent for the note plus the actual costs, and so that was almost a 40% ROI. So this was a really good deal overall, and about in line with what I had projected for being able to get the note reperforming and do a modification and then resell the note. Now, the other thing that's interesting is to look at the ROI from the JV perspective. So I did have a JV partner who funded this deal, and they actually funded 27,340. Now, the reason the JV funding was so high was because they were funding for the foreclosure scenario, because I thought there was, maybe a 50% chance we were going to go down that road. And what I didn't want to do was have to go back to them for more funds later on. So they received half of the interest payments, they received a split of the profits, and so their total return ends up being 14%, which is still a very healthy return. It's not half of this because this 14% is based on what they actually funded, which was up here. Now, as the deal went along, once we got this reperforming, I did refund a large portion of the reserve that they gave me for cost, but that didn't happen until several months into the deal. There were also some interest splits that were paid along the way before there was an exit on the deal. So the total timeline was about 13 months because they had also funded this after I bought the note. So what I did in this case, what I do often is I went out and bought this note at the end of June, and then found a JV partner later on once I had it. Fortunately, I usually have, cash on hand, and I like to just, when I find a note I want to buy, I like to just close it and buy it, and then worry about the JV funding separately so that the JV funding isn't something that can potentially tie up me closing on the note. And then if you look at the XIRR, which is another thing I can talk about more when I do some Excel videos, is if you look at the actual annualized return based on the actual cash flows that the JV partner had. So they had 27,000 out initially. I did return 7,000 in principal early. There were some interest splits, but it ended up being 13% overall. So, some of the lessons learned here and things to pay attention to are, if you do get a CFD reperforming, it's usually a pretty good home run from an ROI perspective. So if you were doing this on your own out of your self-directed IRA, that'd be a massive return. Now, if you are using JV funding to do these, you want to try to optimize their returns. So, and there's a balance you got to strike here between making sure you have all the funds that you need to cover the worst case scenario. And here too, at this time last year, my ROI model was more, my cost estimation model was more conservative than what it is now. So if I had this one to do over, I would have taken a little bit less funding, and I probably would have been a little snappier to return the 7,000 in principal once we had the note reperforming and everything was on track. But overall, very solid return to the JV. So that's this case study. I'll have more coming soon. If you want to reach out to me, you can contact me here. Thanks.